Hello and welcome to the Divine Renovation Podcast, where we seek to inspire and equip you to bring your parish from maintenance to mission. My name's Dan, and I'm grateful today to be in studio with two of my friends from Divine Renovation. We've got one of our coaches, Rob McDowell. It's good to see you, Rob.
It's good to see you too, Dan.
And our comms and marketing man, and who's been actually subbing in for me every now and then as I've been traveling, Mike Tanner. It's good for you to be on that chair today.
It's really nice to be over here. There's a little less work I feel like I have to do over here than over there.
In the host chair,
in the hot seat.
Yeah. Well, it's so good to be with both of you today because we're going to be talking a little bit about gratitude. I know next week we've got Steve Foran joining us, and he's written a book called Surviving to Thriving: The 10 Laws of Grateful Leadership. And that gave us a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit today about our own experiences of gratitude in ministry and in life. And so let me just ask you this. Why do you guys think gratitude is important?
I think gratitude's ultimately important because, again, kind of reflecting our brokenness, we have a tendency of being attracted towards the negative, feeling like, we're owed something or we want something, and we tend to miss what we've been given. By and large, not to suggest that people don't have any problems, but I think, a lot of us today have a lot to be thankful for, particularly those of us that are followers of Jesus and recognize his role in our life. Mm-hmm. That there's so much more that we have to be thankful for than what we're missing, and yet we still have a tendency of looking at what we don't have.
I think that coming from a positivity place, which is sort of what I think about in gratitude, is you are grateful, you're positive about that. We're more likely to do better things moving forward than when we come from a place of negativity. So when I'm grateful for the things that I have, I want to build on those things. Mm-hmm. When I'm grateful for my family, for the ministry, for my friends, I want to continue to grow in those things. And it becomes easier, I think, to work forward if you start from that place of gratitude.
So the opposite of gratitude isn't negative, though, right?
What is the opposite of gratitude?
All I can come up with is ungrateful, and I think that's really a cheap way of saying what the opposite is.
Add on the end of it.
I would say it could be from the standpoint, I think, again, recognizing a lot of people are at different places, but by and large, those of us in Western culture, I know people are sick or challenged, all that sort of stuff, but for the most part, I think, and I'll ask this and I'll make a statement and ask it at the same time, is ungratitude ultimately rooted in selfishness?
See, it's funny because I was actually thinking when you started, my first thought was not ungratefulness. My first thought was selfishness. That's what I thought about when I thought of the opposite of gratitude. Being grateful for what we have or being selfish about what we maybe don't have. When I was going through RCIA, I started to question a lot of the things I was doing from a deeper level. Why was I doing the things I was doing? Felt like I was doing the right things, but wanted to kind of dig into a little deeper. And I was holding the door for someone, and as we often do, I sort of became annoyed that they didn't say thank you as they breezed through, because I'm thinking, like, I stopped to hold the door, and they just walked on through as though, no one had done anything for them. And I came to the realization, like, was I doing it for me or was I doing it for them? If I was doing it for them, then I made their day a little bit better, hopefully. And I have no idea what they were going through that day as to why it wouldn't be on their mind to stop and say thank you. And if I'm doing it for me, then I'm doing it for the praise. I'm doing it for their gratitude. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was a really important part for me, was the selfishness of good acts and what I was maybe sometimes doing versus actually doing them because I was grateful to be able to do them.
Mm. It's one of the interesting things about our faith in general, isn't it, Rob? That the intentions behind good acts are often more important than the acts themselves. I think of how we understand works, and so like understanding that what should be driving our good actions are good intentions, mm-hmm. and that good actions in and of themselves aren't merit worthy.
Kind of thinking from the standpoint, what should our beginning point be for those of us who are followers of Jesus? And I think it's what did Jesus do for us, right, on the cross particularly, and then I think of, in Scripture it talks about how we were loved first. So we have, if nothing else, we have the ability to love, or we have the resources to love people in a way because we've been loved first. And so I think part of what our disposition as followers of Christ have to be is recognize that we're loved and allow that to change us and influence us, recognizing that you can't give something away that you've never received. And so God's grace it's been poured into us through his love for us. He values us. He provides for us, right? And then when you start to see that that's been given to us, anything that we do back to people is a reflection of what we've already received. I think of, kind of the scenario when you think of our children. Imagine if, I've got 3 boys, but imagine if I sent my boys into the store to buy groceries. And I don't know, let's say it costs $30 or $40. Generally speaking, if I just said, go in and get me those groceries, they probably don't have $30 or $40 to spend. If I give them $50 and then go and say, hey, can you go in and buy those groceries? They've got the resources to draw on to get the groceries and come back, right? And that's kind of a little bit of how we live our lives. When Jesus asks us to follow him, when he asks us to be thankful, when he asks us to have an attitude of gratitude, as the old expression says. Some of my John Maxwell reading coming back.
In my head, the one thing today, I was like, I'm not going to say
attitude of gratitude.
Sorry.
No, it's funny.
Yeah, at least it wasn't us, Mike. We didn't say it. We can claim that someone else.
No,
someone changed the lower third on Rob's attitude of gratitude.
It's perfectly fine. I just, it was funny.
It's the first leadership book I ever read. So, but yeah. So when you think in terms of, it's easy to draw on resources you recognize you've been given, rather than just trying to find a way to produce them out of nowhere, out of kind of our own source and our own energy. I think that can change how we approach things. It's one of the things we say around here when it comes to leadership and what we do in churches is we're not trying to get people to just try harder. We're trying to get people to recognize what God has for them in following Jesus, in volunteering, and giving their finances, and we're invited to experience the kind of the John 10:10 life full and abundant from that standpoint. And so the beginning point of all of that is it's not just, I guess I got to start living the abundant life. No, you have to realize what you've been given, grow in that, understand it, appreciate it, and let that flow from you. And I think that's where kind of the root of gratitude starts.
So why don't we make it a little more practical? Mike, how do you show gratitude?
I'm someone who I will very often point out the positive works of others, because I realize that my day is made so simple by the acts of so many people. I realize that my day, my morning begins with, my wife does a large number of things to get the kids ready for school. I'm typically managing the kids while she's getting their stuff ready for school. And so I'm very careful to point out to people, like, thank you for making that easier for me. I mean, the people here that we have that do all this work, this podcast comes into place because we have we have a team of people who do so much work getting ready for every podcast and walking us through that process. And so recognizing and pointing out to people the great works they've done is something that I do pretty regularly. My friends and I have this sort of ongoing thing where if we're out shopping somewhere, I have a couple friends of mine who we have this sort of mission to make the day a little bit better for the people that are serving us. So whether that's we're at a retail, we're shopping for clothes, or we're at the grocery store or whatever, I have a real tendency to crack a joke or say a lot of thank you. I'll be the person who will say, have a great day, to the person who's serving me something, even though I know their line. Like I know that they're supposed to say at the end of it, make sure you say this thing. But for me, it's very much about the idea of realizing how much we have, how much we've been given. And I try very much to make sure that the people around me understand that I appreciate those things. There are lots of things I would like, but I'm pretty happy with the things that I have. And I think that's one of the things that I try my best to recognize on a really daily basis.
I think one of the things I try to do is recognize when those things are starting to creep in. So for example, I live in a very probably basic middle-class house, but I own a house, right? And I'm thankful for that. Mm-hmm. But every Sunday when we drive to church, we drive through a neighborhood who probably the value of the homes are twice what mine is. And you'll drive through this and it's easy to think, oh, that's a nice house. Oh, that's a nice house. And you can allow the discontent of what you have right? And I find at those moments I have to discipline myself and recognize. Okay, do I feel I'm owed something? Do I feel, am I now unthankful for something that I used to be thankful for? Right? And just kind of catching that and recognizing, no, as Paul says in Corinthians, you have to take your thoughts captive and make them obedient to Jesus Christ. And I recognize in those moments, no, I'm allowing a thought to come in. And if I dwell on that and build on that thought, that's going to take me down a road of unthankfulness, is it
ungratitude?
Is it ungratitude? Ungratitude or ingratitude?
It's funny when you say that, because I think that there are ways that we are abundant that we don't take the time to think about all the time. When we're driving, my kids go to school in a very wealthy neighborhood with the most expensive houses in all of Halifax. And so we're always in that neighborhood. And it's always fun to look at these houses and be like, oh man, look at the size of that. It's a mansion. That's a literal castle, like in the middle of the city, which is kind of, bananas to see. But I think like, oh, but I'm so happy. And, I know stories of some of these people who are not happy because they don't have the faith and that foundation in abundance that we already have. I think abundance, it's very easy to connect it to those external things. And I'm certainly someone who's done that and continue to do that. But I think recognizing that having a big house, having a nice car, having a multitude of cars, being able to go on vacations, etc., if you don't have inside you that feeling of abundance, it doesn't mean very much.
So one of the things when it comes to gratitude, I've read on the internet, and there's lots of things on the internet, and I'm grateful for the internet most days.
Is it all true? Is it all true?
Everything on the internet is true. Everything.
Pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah.
They checked it all out. Yeah.
Now, I have read on the internet that there's a number of ways that we can practice gratitude. So being intentional about how we be grateful. Do either of you guys have any sort of gratitude practices in your lives?
I don't think I have a specific one. I've started opening and closing my days with a little bit more of quiet, which is sometimes challenging when your day opens with a kid running in and being like, let's watch hockey highlights or whatever it is that we're doing in the morning. But I really think recognizing, we feel like we're out of time all the time. This is the constant thing that we always feel. I don't have enough time to do any of these things. And taking the time to realize that God wants me to be happy in what I'm doing. And so taking that extra moment and stopping and sort of saying, okay, breathe. Like God wants you to breathe this morning. And take a moment to realize that you're really blessed to have the family that you have, to have the friends that you have, to be able to go to a place of work where you feel like you're doing really, really important work. So for me, it is a quiet reflection period at the beginning of my day. And then my day is full. The last few days have been very, very full, as you know, for me with some work things. And it's very
grateful
easy
for that. I'm very grateful. You've had very full days.
I'm very grateful for that. But I think, at the end of the day, it's also really easy to just run at top speed and then just fall down and be done. And I think taking those moments at the beginning and at the end of our day to recognize all of the wonderful things we've been given that day and those pauses that we can take and actually breathing. I started doing yoga a few years ago, and I discovered that I often don't breathe. I very regularly, and most of us don't actually. There's long periods of time where you're doing something and you sort of hold your breath, like you're working and you're like, and everything. And I sort of realized, like when I was doing these yoga moves, I would hold my breath and try and bend myself into some position, and then I'd be like, whew. And I think now through that practice, is actually allowed me to think more about my breath and about taking a breath and what that means, the fact that I can. So I take those moments of quiet and breathing to think about what I'm capable of doing that day and what I have done that day and try and marry those into a thankfulness and a gratitude for that day.
Rob, what about you? Do you have any practices around gratitude?
Try to implement it in my prayer time. Years ago, I was taught a simple 4-letter acrostic, the word acts: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. So that's, and I don't necessarily follow that strictly every day, but that tends to be kind of the outline that I try to follow in my prayer time. So adoration is, just taking the time to recognize my love for God, kind of rooting your prayer time, beginning with God. Confession is kind of bringing your life in alignment, and I try to, confess what I'm aware of, listen, allow kind of God to speak into other areas that maybe I was ignorant of. Then thanksgiving, again, that peace, what has God given me? And then supplication, the give me more, bless me, Jesus part of our prayer that a lot of times we'll start with if we're honest, allowing that to come at the end after you've thought of who God is, aligning your life, and then all that He's given you. It tends to change how you view the more you want in your life.
Oh, interesting.
So it's just kind of a thing that I was taught a number of years ago.
What about you, Dan?
Have either of you guys ever done the Ignatian spiritual exercises? Have you ever?
No.
So I'm seeing some nods. So, I was thinking about this, the question, and I thought, well, I've gone through seasons where that's been part of my prayer practice. I'm not in that season right now, confession, but I've gone through seasons where that's been absolutely part of my prayer practice. And, one of the things in the exercises is to try and identify where you've seen God active in your day. And I think, well, so it's not an express intention of gratitude for that action, but how can you not be grateful if we're able to identify a moment in time in a given day where you can actually see, no, God was there in that moment with me on a thing, whether it's small or trite or whether it's substantial and important. I think it automatically creates it's a positive reflection, right? It's you're recognizing that God's active in you, and so I think that for me, when I reflect back on my prayer time particularly, I think that's probably been that the spiritual exercises have allowed me to experience the gratitude of God in my life in a more profound way. In the less and perhaps more secular response to the question, I would say I've at various times I've kept a journal, not a gratitude journal. I've never done that, but my journal will often I'll be intentional about writing not just what I'm frustrated with or what I'm struggling with, but what are the wins that are going on in my life? Because I know, like so many people, I can drift towards what's going wrong right now, and so like that's I'm really good at defining a problem. That's a personal strength, and unfortunately, I will live in that problem, ignoring all the other wonderful things that might be happening around me because I'm just so good at defining the problem. And it's one of those things that I have to be really intentional to pull myself out of.
I don't do it right now, but I was a stay-at-home dad for a long period of time with 2 children, and when my son was born, to suggest he was not the easiest baby would be an understatement. None are, but it's certainly a lot of struggles. And one thing that we actually started doing, and I just forgot about it till now, is I still have them. I read them the other day. I would take a stack of index cards, and at the end of every day, I would write the date, and I would write something that happened that day that was really profound to me. So, I have there the first time that they said a word or this, but I also have just like really funny things that they did. And I think reflecting on this, I think it has kind of that same idea of like when you see these things, when you make yourself aware of the things that are in front of us that are incredible, how can you not be thankful? Like if you truly see God's work in your day, how could the next thing that you think or say not be thank you?
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about sort of the personal experience of gratitude in our personal practices, but let's make this about teams for a bit here, because we've got a lot of pastors, priests, leaders that listen to this podcast, and so I guess my opening question around so gratitude's important. We can get some semblance of agreement on that. Yeah. All right. So what the heck do we do about it? How do we make teams grateful, and why ought we bother?
That's a good question. I think that one of the things that we need to recognize, and it helps through teamwork, and it has to do with gratitude, is understanding what other people are experiencing or dealing with, and understanding that our personal goals might not align perfectly, and being thankful that at least we have this set vision. So I think once you have that vision in place, understanding and being grateful for the fact that people have so many different ways to get there. If we all had the same path, we wouldn't get nearly as many of these kind of really interesting, exciting things accomplished. But I think being grateful for the differences and understanding those differences between team members as long as we're all moving in the same direction, I think is a really good starting point. I've often worked in jobs where you didn't realize what other people's job really was. And so you didn't know why they weren't helping you with this or why you had to help them with that. And I think if you can make sure that everyone understands those things, you're a little more grateful that we have those different skills, that we have those different opportunities and those different paths through a team.
I think it's a little bit, I mean, you referenced it earlier, Mike, even recognizing like with this podcast, all the people that work behind the scenes, right? And so again, it's easy to feel the pressure, when you're on a team and you're in a job, and, a lot of times in churches, we feel under-resourced. And so you're constantly feeling under the pressure of having to get stuff done. And so you have the expectation, Dan, you're on the team, I'm expecting you to get this done. I'm expecting you. And we don't recognize what people do, right? And so learn to appreciate people for who they are and what they do in the team, and kind of that place of starting there, as opposed to you're a volunteer or you're getting a paycheck, or from the place of expectation as opposed to the place of thankfulness, kind of as the starting point. I think again, part of what we would say that we've been given from God is the idea that He's given us strengths and abilities and gifts, right? And so each and every day we get to implement, hopefully in a high percentage, of things that God has deposited in us that make work joyful. Volunteering work, or for a paycheck work, whatever that may look like. Assuming you've taken the time to kind of figure what that out is and allow yourself to go down that path. Sometimes people don't ever think that way; they just think in terms of a paycheck.
I was out of the country at. I don't want to divulge who I was with, so I'm trying to. I'll try and do this without trying to reveal.
Somewhere else.
I was somewhere not here, meeting with a group that we work
location.
with. So we work with parishes and dioceses all over the world, and so I was out of the country, and one of the experiences I had with this group that we were visiting was that there was this big meeting with all the various team members that were there, and they were talking about the various work that they're doing. And at the end of the meeting, I had the opportunity to talk to some of the leadership and just ask, well, so like, what's the practice of meetings, and how do you guys like? And one of the questions I said, well, based on all my conversations with you and with others on the team and with people behind the scenes, I'm like, there is so many amazing things happening. I said, when do you guys talk about that stuff? Oh, they don't. They don't. So they come together every week for meetings, and they never talk about all the amazing things they're accomplishing. All they focus on are the challenges that they're facing, and then the things the tasks that are in front of them. And they never actually take time to celebrate or recognize both the work that they're doing, but also the work that God's doing through them. And I thought, man, like that's a big miss. Because I think of St. Benedict Parish and other parishes that we work with. A lot of them will pull their teams together, senior leadership teams, or their leaders from the parish, and they'll do the highs, lows things, right? So what are the wins, guys, in the last week? What's been going on, right? And so there's a way to express those wins in that team environment, and that gives a chance for celebration, for recognition and celebration of what's happening, what God's doing, right? And to miss that opportunity, especially when you're a parish on mission, and I know so many of the leaders that listen to this podcast are parishes or churches that are on mission. And that means they're hard in the work of stuff. It can be easy to forget, though. Man, we got to be grateful what we're already accomplishing.
And when you do that well, then when you ask more of people, it's recognized that you're doing that based on their success, not based on the fact that you think they're not doing enough work. There's so many times that when we ask someone to do something, they think like, oh, they're just piling more work on me. They don't realize how much work I'm doing or how much work I've done. But when you're grateful for the work that they've done, and you are expressive about that, when you say, we're so happy you did that, here's what's next, you get people excited to move forward, because it's very easy. Mission is, in a lot of ways, we think of we have these pictures of like these straight lines up the mountain, and you're like, yeah, but have you ever tried to climb a mountain? It's very rarely this. It's often switchbacks. It's often back and forth. It's a struggle. And if you are not showing that gratitude to the people that are getting you there, that are helping you get there, it's very possible for them to fall off and not be able to help you anymore.
Yeah. I find, in all honesty, I find that hard because I do tend to identify more with problems than, I'm more motivated
Fist bump for the problems.
I'm more motivated by solving a problem than I am accomplishing a goal. And so because of that, I tend to live with a sense of an awareness of problems more than when we accomplish things. And so that's where it's helpful for me to have people around me that say, no, we're doing this, or a year ago we were here and now we're here. And, so it's sometimes hard for me in those situations when we're talking about ministry wins or highs and lows and things like that. It's like, well, I can think of this problem and I can think of that problem. What have we done recently, right? And then, so that can sometimes be a challenge for me to put myself in that place of recognizing, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. We have done that.
When you think of the fact, like we use strengths finders significantly in the ministry and in the parishes that we work with, we just did up new signs for all of our staff, and we actually have their strengths right on the bottom of it. And I think if you build your team around those things, you start to understand that, oh, this is the person who's gonna be woo. This is the person who's gonna get us going because they're excited. This is the person who's gonna really focus on that problem and do those things. But if you're establishing those and you're understanding those, then I think it makes that go a lot better. Mm-hmm. Because yes, there's people who we work very, very different ways. Yeah. So,
and I think for me, anyways, it's I think of even here at Divine Renovation, like our team here. I mean, you guys know the kind of person I am, right? Which is like, okay, what's the next hill to conquer? It's hard for me personally. It's hard for me to stand atop any hill that our team has conquered and be like, oh yeah, we got it. Because I can only think of the next one. Like I am so wired to think, okay, well, yeah, I knew we were going to get this one. So, but now let's think about the next one, guys. Yeah. And so I know myself that I have to be so very intentional about recognizing just how far we've come, because as a ministry, I mean, this ministry, God's blessed us tremendously in terms of our growth and impact. And so, I probably fall far short of what I ought to do, but my hope is that, at our team meetings and such, when we take time to recognize sort of the journey we've been on as a team, that we can celebrate a lot of the things that we've accomplished, because man, oh man, every few weeks, there's something else that this team's been able to pull off through the grace of God. So it's exciting. But I know for me, I'm like you, Rob. I'm like I zone in so quickly to the problems, and I'm driven perhaps more to a goal. But once I get it, I'm like, okay, that was nice. But what's next? Like I don't even want to celebrate it. I just want the next thing. And so it's man, I'm broken, aren't I? We need that Steve guy to come on here and set me straight.
Sort it all out, sure.
So next week's podcast is going to be killer. So let me ask you a question about teams in general. And so let's presume that one of the priests, leaders, pastors out there, that they're able to get this gratitude thing going inside of their teams. How do you think it changes a team? So if a team becomes grateful and has either a practice of gratitude or a recognition of gratitude in the way they work, does it change them? And if so, in what ways?
I think so. I mean, for sure. If you're thankful and you have gratitude, there's probably a sense of accomplishment there, or there's a sense of what you have, if nothing else, right? So when you're thankful, I think it's going to connect to the fact that you're making a difference in some way, right? Particularly around a team. If you're bringing people in and you've done the due diligence to make sure that you've positioned people around strengths and all that sort of stuff, you're going to see good things happen. And so I think at the end of the day, you're going to recognize those wins. You're going to recognize those different, even if they're small, right? Because this is a long journey around parish renewal, right? So there's a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sort of, But again, if you can stop and see that ultimately gratitude is going to be rooted in how you're making a difference. I think that's going to be, the place that's going to help a team, so that what you're doing matters.
Yeah, and I think that when we're, not that it's the purpose of it, but when we are grateful, we often want to repay that forward. So when we are a team that is grateful, we feel blessed and want to share what we've been given with the world. As we feel like we are abundant, we want to share that, and we want to put that into other people and let them get that same thing, that same kind of feeling. So I think for me, if you have a team that is based on gratitude, you're thankful for what you have, and you want to give thanks in return through your works, through your words, and through your community.
Right. Well, guys, I'm grateful we had this chance to have a talk. I'm grateful I wasn't the guy who said an attitude of gratitude.
I'll own that. I will own that.
Yep, it's it did come up before the podcast that someone might accidentally say it.
I was not in that conversation.
You weren't in that conversation,
record.
so you get to wear the attitude of gratitude T-shirt. That's your
I'm gonna
thing
make
now,
you a
man.
hat. I'm gonna change your sign. Actually, it's gonna be Rob, attitude of gratitude, and then it'll have your scores.
Well, if anybody I went to college with happens to come across this podcast, I'll be laughing because I was a huge John Maxwell fan when I was in college. He's the guy that taught me that phrase. So.
Let me give you one opportunity here to save your reputation, Rob.
I think we're beyond that point, in all honesty. But I'm thankful for all the other things that I have going on in my life besides this podcast right now.
Well, let me ask you this question as we close. What does Scripture teach us? What does Scripture teach us about gratitude?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always points us towards the fact that that joy is a choice. And I think we have a tendency of thinking thankfulness, joyfulness, all this sort of stuff is a feeling. And it should so we should do whatever we can to make ourselves happy so that life is easy and we're going great and everything is up and to the right. But I think of like Paul in Philippians 4, and he says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." And again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And he
was on a yacht at that point, right?
Yeah, he was and he's penning those words or verbalizing those words to whoever penned them, depending on how those words get written down, from jail, from prison. Right. And so, yeah, he's not sitting on a beach in Hawaii saying, yeah, always be thankful. No, he's writing those words from, probably worse conditions than even people in jail today would understand, from that standpoint. So he wasn't writing that, say, life is great and wonderful, so be thankful for it. He's saying, no, joy is a choice. From that standpoint, I think of even over in Hebrews where it writes in Hebrews 12, where it talks about Christ going to the cross and said, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. I'm pretty sure, Christ wasn't thinking, it's going to be a great day, obviously, but yet but the joy set before him, right? And so he recognized that in Christ there was this vision before him to pursue in his life, that despite how hard the current circumstances were, with recognizing that when you're with God, you're always ultimately working towards a place of joy, and that you can have that joy in your life.
Thanks for that, Rob. I think, we're still going to make that sign for you, though. Yeah. All right. So next week we'll be joined by Steve Foran, the author of Surviving to Thriving. So you've got 1 week to go ahead and order this off of Amazon or whatever your favorite bookseller is, and read through it. And meanwhile, next week, please tune back in to hear someone who's far more expert at gratitude, perhaps, than the three of us, or at least has a more robust perspective. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again next week. God bless.